And welcome to another episode of the Dynasty Mind. This is episode 2. My name is at FFDynasty101 on Twitter. Today's episode presented by fakepigskin.com, and we're just here to kind of do a little brief episode about how to be a better Dynasty owner. Today's episode, we're going to talk about breaking news and reacting to news. And if you are very much involved in the Dynasty world, you already know that there's a lot of news on this during this week. This is our first training camp week, and already we have injury concerns, we have role changes, and of course we have definitely news about players coming back from injury and how they're looking. So sit back, enjoy. Let's talk a little bit into the Dynasty world. So, starting off with a couple of news and notes of noteworthy. Like I said, if you're very plugged into the Dynasty world, you already know that we have a major injury that has a direct effect. We have other injuries that have more a trickling down effect that you need to pay attention to. And of course, there's talk about role changes for some of the players. I can share a little bit about my process, but I also like to talk about the overarching ideas of what you could do to prepare yourself, what you could do to make yourself prepare for these kind of issues that pop up. The training camp is barely a week in. Not all teams have reported in, and already we have news that would change the way you approach the kickoff week, approach your trade, and of course, if you haven't drafted yet, it will definitely affect the way you draft. Starting off with the biggest news, of course, is Kenneth Dixon, who is reported to miss the rest of the season with a torn MCL. This is big because not only was he suspended for 4 games, so he's already low on the totem pole as far as dependent on for immediate production. But Kenneth Dixon is probably a favorite of a lot of the people in last year's rookie draft, including one Josh Norris, who compared him to Frank Gore. I personally didn't see it. I wasn't a big proponent of Dixon, although I was a fan of his talent. He looked to me like built in a similar mold of a Bernard or maybe a Duke Johnson. However, this is unfortunate news that he would miss the entire 2017 season, which leaves us to kind of speculate who will be taking that position. Savvy owners know it's going to be Terrence West and Danny Woodhead's job, neither which can be counted on as to be consistent scorers, but both will have value as an RB2 and at worst an RB3. Specifically in a PPR league, you want Danny Woodhead, and Terrence West did not look bad in my opinion. The other news, Flacco is out, I think 4 to 6 week was the timetable, and other timetable there was conflicting reports. Of course, in essence, he is probably looking to miss the entire off season. Now, quarterback is not as big of an issue for 1 quarterback leagues, but for 2 quarterback leagues, you are running the risk of not having him for at least for week 1. And it is if I'm not mistaken, a neck injury, which can be concerning and could potentially make him miss more time depending on the severity of the injury. So as far as we know, we have to just assume that he will be ready for week 1 until week closer to the end of August. Third news, which I don't find as much as alarming as most people do, is Jordan Reed, who will be placed on the physically unable to perform list for a big toe injury. Now, it doesn't sound like he's going to be in danger of missing any time for the start of the season. The Dynasty world is just concerned that because Jordan Reed has been known to be have quite a lengthy injury history, and his recovery is not exactly ideal or timely. So there are ways to react to it, there are ways to underreact to it, and there are ways to overreact to it. The other news that what popped up was the Duke Johnson is talked about being used more as a slot. Now there are conflicting reports out there, and I'm not sure which one it'll be for now, but some say that Duke Johnson is moving to a full-time slot receiver role. Others say he will be used more from the slot but retain his running back designation. Now, for most, you may not find this important, especially for 12-team shallower leagues. Duke Johnson may be just a waiver wire option or just a deep bench stash. But for deeper leagues, we're talking 16-team, 14-team, 32-man roster, 28-man roster. Duke Johnson is most likely on a roster because there is some upside to his PPR value. He's built in a similar kind of a role as Danny Woodhead. Now, if he does move to a wide receiver, it would definitely lower his value by a lot. And I mentioned this in this past week on Twitter that if he does become a full-time wide receiver and his designation changes to that, he's more likely to fall in a high-end wide receiver 4, low-end wide receiver 3 kind of tier, which basically means he's mixed in with a lot of the rest. Browns is not exactly a high-octane offense that could support multiple receivers, and I think Kenny Britt and Corey Coleman will just dominate the market share of targets. It is concerning, but if he retains his running back role, this might be good news. That means he and Isaiah Crowell can be on the field at the same time and just being used creatively by Hugh Jackson, and which sounds like Duke Johnson will have over his role as a spellback and as well as a slot receiver. The final news that just broke, and it really broke my heart to learn that Devonta Booker has a broken wrist and he's slated to miss 6 to 8 weeks. So this does cut into the beginning of the season. Now, Booker is coming into the season as a underperforming, injured, very, very much disliked running back, and CJ Anderson is the one that's was expected to start the season, but I had high hopes that Booker would eventually carve out a role for himself. Now, this puts him a little bit behind as he is still adjusting to the league speed. We only saw flashes of good stuff on film. He did look bad, I will admit. He did look bad, but on a stat sheet, he did produce a solid amount of points to be counted on as a running back too. Now, this does put him behind, and which would mean that Broncos might have a 1-2 punch with Jamal Charles and CJ Anderson to the start of the season. But keep monitoring Booker. He'll be useful perhaps mid to late season. Could be a late hero, but if you are in a seasonal redraft league, you're probably not looking to draft him at all. And if you're in a dynasty league, there are options for you. And today, this is the episode that I kind of want to talk about what your options are. Now, reacting to news, a lot of people do it a lot of different ways, but there are certain ways that you can make your team better in a sense. The initial reaction, of course, finding out news, comes as a shock to many. If you are an owner, of course, you feel your depth at least has been hurt, or your starters has been hurt, and changes some of your plans. But it's happening early in the off season, so reacting accordingly could be beneficial for you. If you are not an owner of any of these players, there's an edge for you to be gained, but also there are ways where you react that might just cause your league mates to dislike you, perhaps, or feeling that you want to take advantage of weaker owners, which is all viable. I don't preach the same type of process, and I'm sure this will make Denny roll over in his grave, because he always preached that empathy has no place in Dynasty, but I find it more enjoyable if I can win despite not needing to pull a fast one over my fellow league mates. So let's talk about the initial reaction. It's very much emotionally laden. You can be elated that your player suddenly gain a new role, or you may be saddened and trying to overcompensate for the loss that you just suffered. Now, one of the things that I've learned through my times playing daily fantasy football, and those have benefits to building my dynasty mindset, is the word tilt. Tilt can take form in a lot of ways, and I will use that to describe the emotion that takes over our logic and makes us overreact or underreact to these breaking news. Tilt can cause us to lose sight of what was important for our process, what was important for our team and team building. So you might want to check whether you're tilting or not. One of my favorite Twitter followers is Davis Maddock, who can tell you all about tilt. In essence, your brain kind of gets taken over by more of a gut reaction, a more emotional reaction. There is a certain joy to us when we want to be the first to uncover new gems, or suddenly find ourselves in a good place to take advantage of like I said, of other owners by trying to buy low on a certain player, or trying to offer a replacement to the owner and asking for an exorbitant amount in return, sometimes being ridiculous. Now, for maybe inexperienced owner, you might find the joy of ripping them off. But for more seasoned owners, when you try to throw a lowball offer, or try to blatantly sell high, trying to take advantage of the unfortunate owners, you'll get a very negative reaction and probably be blacklisted, if not taken off the Christmas wish list. For some of you, it's fine. You might be like, you don't care how others think about you. This is the way you play. And for others, what I find is that you will potentially diminish the possibility of future trading with this owner. And in a dynasty league, I find that to be unfortunate, that if you can close out yourself to one or multiple owners by insulting them with terrible offers. So another way that perhaps then you might want to approach a situation like this is to kind of gauge what the owner is, whether the owner is who just recently maybe lost Kenneth Dixon, or who owns a Flacco and hoping that he was his QB2, what his level of tilt is, and try to talk and have a dialogue about how he wants to approach it. Don't come in with an offer immediately, because it might seem like you're too eager, you're overly opportunistic. And for yourself too, you want to see how you can gain an advantage in this position. Mostly how dynasty owners react in a deeper league is to look at the backup, or the backup to the backup. The third string might definitely have a more prominent role. For example, this past week, I buy into the narrative that in case Duke Johnson does become a full-time wide receiver, let's say he becomes a slot receiver, the first thing I go is to look at the depth chart. And the Browns have a really thin depth chart in the running back position, so making this move even less likely. But on the off chance it does happen, Matthew Days is a newly acquired rookie for the Browns, who will be directly behind Isaiah Crowell should the Duke Johnson move happen. So he's free in all of my league. I tried to pick him up in a couple of ones. I try not to overly acquire him in all leagues, because that would mean me dropping someone of value. And that's the kind of decisions you have to make when you try to make a free pickup. You have to drop someone, and is the drop worth the gain you're getting. In this case, I don't think Matthew Days is an outstanding running back at the NFL level, but on the off chance that I'm wrong, I still have him stashed up, and I'm able to drop maybe my seventh wide receiver seventh, or a long shot quarterback that I've stashed away. So that is one way you can approach it, kind of making a cost analysis about the pickup you're about to do, and whether even if the player hits, how big of a hit does it warrant a drop of a better player who might not have that immediate glow to them because they've been on your roster for a while and you just want the new thing. And this is a tilt that you have to pay attention to. The other thing you want to look into is have some trusted sources. I have a league that's been ongoing for 5 years, and the owners there are one of the sharpest mind, and they can tell me whether the backup, should they gain the opportunity to say Terrence West, the backup to Kenneth Dixon, or was it the other way around? I'm not even sure anymore. So does Terrence West gain opportunity? What does history say? What are the scenarios? You can just run through these with one of the sharper minds and kind of get a gauge whether your fantasy about the player matches the reality, matches the output that you're potentially gain, and you make the decision whether it's worth trading for Terrence West maybe, or paying the certain price for Danny Woodhead, if you will. So some of and I have to emphasize having a trusted source, because there are outrageous people out there on the Twitter who make outrageous claims. They go straight for the lowest probability players and try to prop them up. I've heard Taliaferro being propped up because of the Kenneth Dixon injury. Well, Taliaferro has moved to fullback, and if you judge it by the way Kyle Juszczyk was used last year by the Ravens as a fullback, you'll see that this is a player position that it's really hard to count on in a seasonal league where you have to do roster decisions. But perhaps it's useful for an best ball NFL 10 kind of league, where and at random weeks they may score 2 touchdowns even with the low yardage. So those are the kind of things you have to think about when deciding the format and deciding how you want to approach certain players. Just keep asking yourself questions, asking if this player is worth the roster spot over the player that you're about to drop, and bounce ideas with trusted resources. If you're very new to Dynasty, and I understand that there are tons of information out there and you just don't know what to do, go for the big names like Matt Harmon, go for DLF, go for Osfake Pigskin. You can always come to me, and I can, if I don't know the answer, I can definitely guide you to a person that will have the answer for you. Okay, so that's one way to think about news, how to react to news. Now, another way you can kind of start thinking about reacting to news is how do your league mates react to news? This is something that's not really talked a lot about, but you have to realize that you are only one out of 12 or 14 or 16 or 32 owners, whichever your league size may be. And how do they react to news? Do they overreact? Do they jump on a chance to pick up a Matthew Days, or do they jump on a chance to pick up Vernon Davis, for example, with the Jordan Reed news? Do they overreact? Do they underreact? Or do they react appropriately? This way you can figure out how you would like to attack your waiver wire, attack your league. Make notes, take notes of how your other league mates are doing, and see how they do historically, how they do in the league. Are they very sharp in picking out the right players off the waiver wire? Do they react to news accordingly, or do they use this moment to pick up the player and trade it for a profit? Learn from those process. You'll be able to figure out who is the sharp mind in your league, and who you can and what you can do about their reaction. Do you like a certain player, but someone would always be ahead of you? Well, now you know, for the next time similar news happen, you know the best way to perhaps bid a higher on a blind bid waiver, or you would want to hopefully be able to talk to the owner who snags him and maybe create a trade. But all of this, you have to have a process, and that process of your team building philosophy do not compromise the integrity of your team building process. I'm sure it's very alluring and tempting to be the first to react to any breaking news, but again, pay attention to your tilt. Don't overreact, don't underreact, but do react. So this is for today's Dynasty Mind, where we kind of have a talk about how to react to breaking news. There will be more to come, I'm sure, as training camp goes on. Injuries will happen, role changes will happen. Prepare for the unexpected, and hope you just pay attention to your tilt. Before leaving you, I would like to recognize some of the names on some of the tools that I found very helpful in my Dynasty process, Dynasty team building, Dynasty knowledge. The first one I gotta represent is our angle of pursuit at FPOAP. That's F fake pigskin, FP angle of pursuit, AOP. This podcast is an amazing podcast hosted on our site. You can find it on Fake Pigskin podcast website. As you can see our address up here, fakepigskin.com/podcast/. We have amazing episodes talking to you about the variety of formats in Dynasty, talking to different bright minds in the field, and you'll get breaking news, you'll get reactions from pros, and just a good one-stop shop to get an overview of fantasy football news. The other thing I want to share with you is on Twitter. If you go look for @NDT Scouting, that's N as in Nancy, D as in Derek, T as in Timothy, NDT Scouting. Follow Kyle Krabs. He is an amazing writer, an amazing scout, talent evaluator, I think. And he will be his is not fantasy oriented, but when I want information about rookies, prospect, Devy players, I go to look at the scouting report and how that kind of trickles down to fantasy meaning. Him and his team are very good at writing the strength and weaknesses, identifying the strength and weaknesses of these college players, which I find very helpful in developing my initial thoughts for certain players before I make a decision how to approach them. What do I have to look forward to in films? So those are the two I'll leave you with. If you have more questions, if you have requests for some type of episode, feel free to hit me up at FF Dynasty 101. And I will see you next time on the Dynasty Mind. Next time, can't promise next week. Next time, I'm hoping to dive into next year's rookie crop. One of the challenges issued to me is by Travis Mays or Travis Teschner. I can't ever get those two apart, but one who challenges me to look into Ronald Jones, the running back out of USC. we have different opinions about him, and I will present my case as to why I am for my stance for Ronald Jones. So if you have a request too for Devi players for next year's crop of rookie players, please feel free to hit me up, and I will do my best to dedicate an episode to you. All right, peace out, have a good day, and hope you enjoyed this episode.